think as any mother would be, she was absolutely over the moon. And actually we had quite an awkward situation because I knew.
For years, Princess Catherine carried herself with quiet strength, the kind that doesn't crack even under the weight of the crown. But that strength was tested the day she discovered a letter she was never meant to see. A letter William had gone to great lengths to hide. "I thought we shared everything," she reportedly told a close friend, her voice breaking. The moment she found it, something inside her shifted. From that point on, the world she thought she knew began to crumble. Those who know her best say the letter's contents weren't just painful, they were life-altering. And for Catherine, silence became its own kind of heartbreak. She had always loved with her whole heart, giving herself completely to the people she cared for. That boundless devotion made her magnetic, but also fragile in ways few understood. It was this very quality that had first drawn William to her, the warmth that made her seem to glow from within. But recently, that glow had dimmed. That morning, she woke before dawn, unsure why. The palace was still and heavy with quiet. She moved through her morning routine like a ghost, kettle whistling, toast burning slightly, tea poured without a thought. Her hands moved on autopilot, but her mind was far away, tangled in uneasy thoughts she couldn't quite name. William had been present, yet distant. His smiles no longer reached his eyes, and his words felt polished, not sincere. Something was missing, something she couldn't ignore anymore. Later, while tidying up his study, she found herself doing what she'd always done, little acts of love no one noticed. She reached for the drawer where he kept his cufflinks. The familiar scent of old books and polished wood filled the room. Then she saw it, an envelope, thick and cream-colored, half hidden under a stack of papers. Her name was written across the front in William's unmistakable handwriting. Neat, deliberate, familiar. It wasn't placed casually. It was concealed. Meant not to be found. Her hand hovered above it, frozen. Her heartbeat quickened in that primal way the body senses danger before the mind understands it. Why would he hide something meant for her? What could possibly require secrecy between husband and wife? With trembling hands, she lifted the letter. The paper felt heavy, the kind reserved for words that matter. The seal was unbroken, yet it seemed to hum with unspoken tension. Catherine sat down in the chair by the window, the same one where William had once knelt and asked her to be his wife. That memory flickered through her mind like an old photograph, distant, faded, almost unreal. The envelope rested in her lap, fragile and dangerous all at once. Her fingertips traced her name as tears welled in her eyes. She hadn't even opened it yet, but deep down, she already knew. Whatever truth waited inside, life would never be the same again. Tears came before she even realized they'd formed, quiet, uninvited, and blurring her vision as she stared at the envelope still resting in her hands. Her body seemed to grasp what her mind refused to admit. Whatever truth lay sealed inside those pages, it carried the kind of power that splits life cleanly into before and after. Her breath caught, shallow and uneven, as though her heart already knew what was coming. The soft morning light spilled through the curtains, turning the ivory paper to gold. The stillness of the room made the moment feel unreal, as if time itself was holding its breath. Part of her longed to tuck the envelope back beneath the book, to erase this discovery, to return to the fragile peace of not knowing. But ignorance was no longer possible. The letter was real. William had written it, and hidden it. Whatever message waited inside, it was something he hadn't been able to speak aloud. Something that needed the safety of distance, of ink instead of voice. The not knowing became unbearable. With trembling fingers, Catherine slid her thumb beneath the seal. The faint tear of paper echoed through the quiet like thunder in a church. Inside were folded sheets, ordinary paper, ordinary words, yet they felt impossibly heavy. How could ink and parchment hold the power to destroy everything she thought was certain? William's words had always carried weight, even when unspoken. He was gentle by nature, the kind of man who noticed the smallest things. When someone's hands were cold, when silence meant sadness, when kindness could be offered without needing recognition. Catherine had loved that about him. His warmth lived in gestures, not declarations. He made her feel seen in a world where everyone else looked past her. But now, that same man lay awake each night, haunted by a choice he couldn't undo. While Catherine slept beside him, lost in dreams, William stared at the ceiling, guilt pressing down like a stone. Sleep no longer came easily, his thoughts circled endlessly back to the same torment. The letter still existed. He had written it months before, in a moment of fear and confusion, when everything around him seemed to be collapsing. It wasn't anger that guided his hand, but desperation, a need to confess something he couldn't bear to speak. When it was done, he sealed it, addressed it to her, then froze. Instead of burning it, instead of delivering it, he'd tucked it away, convincing himself he'd decide later what to do. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Dust gathered. Guilt deepened. Why didn't I destroy it? He whispered once into the darkness, the words barely escaping his lips. Catherine hadn't stirred beside him, unaware that the thing he feared most wasn't losing her, it was a finding the truth he'd tried so hard to bury. He remembered the rain most of all. That cold, endless kind of rain that seemed to soak through the soul and make everything feel heavier. He'd been sitting at his desk that day, pen trembling in his hand, trying to explain the one thing he couldn't even explain to himself, how a single decision could unravel everything he loved. The words had come pouring out in a blur of panic and regret. Every secret, every misstep, every truth too sharp to speak aloud spilled onto the page like a confession he hadn't meant to write. He'd written about choices Catherine didn't know about, moments he wished he could erase, mistakes that had started small but led somewhere dark and irreversible. Each sentence carried the weight of guilt, fear, and a desperate wish to undo what couldn't be undone. When the last line was written, his hands were shaking. He'd sealed the letter quickly, before he could lose his nerve. Her name went on the front, written carefully, lovingly, because despite everything, he still believed she deserved the truth. But courage abandoned him as soon as the ink dried. He told himself he'd give it to her soon, once he found the right words to soften the blow. Just not today. Not yet. He slipped it under a photography book they'd once leafed through together, full of wild landscapes and memories of simpler times. The irony of hiding it there, beneath something they both loved, wasn't lost on him. Days became weeks. The letter stayed hidden. William tried to mend things in silence, overcompensating with kindness and effort. He thought if he could just love her harder, be better, maybe the truth would lose its power. But secrets don't dissolve, they ferment. They grow heavier with time until they press against the heart like a weight you can't shift. Catherine began to notice the distance. Her eyes lingered a little too long when he spoke, searching for something unspoken. And though she never asked the questions aloud, he could feel them in the air between them. He often found himself thinking, why don't secrets just stay buried? But deep down, he knew. They always rise. They wait until the moment you least expect it, and then they break the surface, unstoppable. That morning came like a verdict. William moved through his routine like a man walking toward his own undoing. Nothing had happened yet, but dread had already taken shape inside him. He was in the middle of a meeting when Peter, one of the household staff, appeared at the door. Normally calm, Peter looked uneasy. "Sir," he began quietly, glancing down the hall, "Lady Catherine was in your study earlier. Before breakfast." For a second, William couldn't breathe. The room seemed to tilt. He gripped the edge of the doorframe as his pulse thundered in his ears. "My study," he managed to say, though his voice didn't sound like his own. "Yes, sir." She was there, for quite a while. He didn't wait to hear another word. He was already moving, his footsteps echoing down the corridor, each one louder than the last. His heart pounded, not from exertion, but from the sickening certainty that the moment he'd feared had arrived. The door to his study was half open. Through the narrow gap, he saw her, Catherine, sitting in the chair by the window, the letter open in her hands. The same chair where they'd shared laughter, where he'd once felt untouchable in her trust. Now she sat in silence, the pages spread before her, his secrets no longer buried in ink but alive in the air between them. "Catherine," he whispered, the word catching in his throat. But it was too late. The truth was already free, and there was no taking it back. There was a silence between them so deep it seemed to swallow the room. The letter lay open in Catherine's trembling hands, its pages fluttering faintly in the still air. She stared at the broken seal as if staring hard enough might undo what had already been unleashed. The paper looked harmless, just ink and fibers, yet it held the power to dismantle her world. Her breath came unevenly, her vision blurred with tears she hadn't realized were forming. The study, once her sanctuary, now felt alien. The warm tones of the room had turned cold, every familiar object a stranger. Her fingers unfolded the pages slowly, almost mechanically, as though her body moved while her soul stood apart, watching. The rustle of paper sounded deafening in the hush. William's handwriting filled the pages, elegant, measured, but the words themselves struck with a cruelty that no tidy script could disguise. "My dearest Catherine." Those first 3 words sliced through her. How easily they once would have soothed her, and how hollow they felt now. As she read, each sentence struck like a pulse of pain. Meetings she'd never known about. Promises made elsewhere. Quiet confessions that rewrote everything she thought was real. Whole parts of their life had been built on shadows. And then, in the 3rd paragraph, came the line that shattered her completely. The admission that redefined their entire marriage, the moment when love and betrayal collided in the same breath. Her lips parted, the words spilling out in a whisper meant for no one. "How could you?" The room seemed to shrink around her. Still, she kept reading, because stopping now would mean living forever with half the truth. Every sentence grew heavier, every word cutting deeper. William confessed to regrets, to cowardice, to pretending that his silence was protection. He wrote of loving her even as he deceived her, of trying to spare her pain while being the one to cause it. At first came shock, a cold, paralyzing numbness that stole the air from her lungs. Then the anger followed, fierce and blinding, burning away what little calm remained. But underneath it all was something quieter and far more destructive: heartbreak. Not the kind you cry through and recover from, but the kind that remakes you, leaves you hollow where something whole used to be. Her voice cracked as she whispered to the empty room. Was any of it real? Her hand shook so badly the pages quivered, the words dancing in and out of focus. She tried to draw a steady breath, but it felt like there wasn't enough air in the world. The letter slipped from her grasp, falling in slow motion, sheets drifting, separating, scattering across the floor like broken pieces of a life she no longer recognized. Her knees gave out. She sank to the carpet, pain flaring in her legs but registering as nothing beside the storm inside her chest. Her body folded in on itself, the sobs tearing loose from somewhere deep and raw. They were the kind of cries that leave you voiceless, guttural, shaking, unstoppable. Tears splattered onto the fallen pages, the ink bleeding and blurring until William's words became ghosts on the paper, fragments of a confession dissolving beneath her grief. The room spun, the world tipped, and Catherine pressed her forehead against the floor, as if the earth itself might steady her when nothing else could. Catherine stayed on the floor for a long time, her hands pressed against the carpet, searching for something solid in a world that suddenly felt like it was slipping away. Time stopped behaving normally, minutes or hours, she couldn't tell. The pain was too large to measure. Her lungs burned, her body trembling as she forced herself to breathe. One inhale, one exhale, again and again. It was all she could control when everything else had fallen apart. Slowly, beneath the ruin of heartbreak, something else began to form. Not comfort, not calm, but resolve. It was hard and cold and steady, a strength she hadn't known she possessed. She wouldn't stay crumpled forever. She wouldn't let this be the end of her. With shaking arms, Catherine pushed herself upright. Her reflection in the window startled her, red-rimmed eyes, wet cheeks, hair tangled, but behind the damage was something fierce. Something alive. She gathered the fallen pages one by one, her fingers trembling as she fit them back together, aligning each edge, smoothing each crease. When they were whole again, she folded the letter and pressed it against her chest, not out of affection, but out of defiance. Proof. Evidence. A wound turned into a weapon. Her knees wobbled as she stood, but she did stand. The world outside her window looked maddeningly normal, sunlight spilling over the gardens, birds moving through branches as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Catherine stared for a long moment, feeling the cruel disconnect between the calm outside and the chaos inside her chest. Then she heard it, the sound of footsteps in the corridor. Slow. Familiar. William's. Her pulse steadied, not from peace, but from clarity. The man who had written those words, who'd hidden that truth, was about to face her. She turned toward the door, the letter clutched tightly to her heart. The tears had dried. The shaking had stopped. When the door creaked open and William appeared, his face was ashen, his eyes wide with dread. For the first time, she didn't flinch. She met his gaze head-on. "We need to talk," she said simply, her voice steady, sharp, unyielding. William froze in the doorway, the sound of her voice cutting through him like a blade. Once, he'd been the man people relied on, calm, measured, always knowing what to do when things went wrong. Responsibility had been his armor. But now it felt like a burden crushing him from within. The steadiness Catherine had once admired in him now seemed like cowardice, the inability to face her, to be raw and human when it mattered most. Every step toward the study felt like a sentence being carried out. His pulse pounded in his ears. His palms were slick with sweat. He had faced public crises before, but nothing like this private reckoning. As he reached the doorway, part of him still prayed the scene might somehow be different. That maybe she hadn't read it all. But hope was a luxury he no longer deserved. Catherine stood by the window, the morning light surrounding her like a halo, but there was nothing angelic about her stance. She was carved from stone now, shoulders rigid, jaw tight, the letter clutched against her chest like a shield. Her face was pale, eyes swollen, but behind them burned something fierce and unrelenting. The room itself seemed to hold its breath. The familiar space, the desk, the books, the scent of paper and polish, all felt strange, hollow. William tried to speak, but the words refused to form. What could he say? What apology could survive this kind of betrayal? Her silence was louder than any scream. She waited, giving him space to speak, and that mercy hurt more than fury ever could. Catherine, he began, but the sound of his own name in her voice stopped him cold. Don't. Her voice wasn't raised, but it sliced through the air like glass. Don't say my name like that. You don't get to any more. And just like that, the distance between them, invisible but enormous, became permanent. Catherine raised the letter between them, her hand steady despite the storm beneath her skin. When, she asked quietly, were you planning to tell me? Or was I supposed to live my life never knowing, trusting a marriage that was already gone? The words struck harder than a shout. William felt the defenses he'd spent years perfecting begin to collapse. Every wall of justification, every layer of restraint, gone. I never wanted you to find it like that, he stammered. I never meant. You never meant for me to find it at all, she cut in, her voice trembling but sharp. That's the truth, isn't it? You wrote it, addressed it to me, and then buried it. You decided I didn't need to know. He couldn't argue, because she was right. She was painfully, precisely right. Please, he said, taking a hesitant step forward. She stiffened instantly, and he stopped. Please let me explain. I know I've lost that right, but just, hear me. Then explain, she said, her voice breaking for the first time. Explain why you thought lying was easier than trusting me. Explain why you made choices that affected both of us, alone. Explain why you let me find out like this. The dam broke. Words poured from him in a rush, tangled, uneven, raw. He confessed the truth about the failing investments, the deals that spiraled out of control, the fear that made him desperate. How every bad decision was made under the illusion of protection, of sparing her the stress. How his silence grew until it became another lie entirely. I thought I could fix it before you ever had to know, he said, voice shaking. I thought if I just worked harder, maybe I could save everything. I told myself I was protecting you. But I wasn't. I was protecting myself. His eyes filled. His voice broke. I wrote that letter when I thought it might all fall apart, when I was terrified I'd lose you. I wanted you to know the truth if I couldn't make things right. But I was too much of a coward to say it while I still could. Fix it, Catherine repeated softly, almost to herself. Then louder, sharper. You can't fix betrayal, William. You can't rebuild trust with the same hands that destroyed it. Every time you smiled at me while hiding this, you made a choice, and it wasn't me. He dropped his gaze, the shame almost too heavy to bear. I know, he whispered. I know, and I hate it. I hate what I've done to you. To us. I would give anything to go back, to do it differently, but I can't. His body gave out. He sank into a chair, shaking uncontrollably as tears blurred his vision. I'm sorry, he managed between sobs. I know it doesn't fix anything. You deserve truth. I gave you deception. You deserved a partner, and I shut you out. I'm so sorry, Catherine. I'm so sorry. She stood still, silent, watching the man she once trusted unravel completely. Pain and fury battled on her face, but beneath them flickered something else, faint and unwanted, compassion she refused to let surface. You're right, she said at last, her tone steady again. Sorry isn't enough. It doesn't unbreak what's broken. It doesn't erase months of lies. It doesn't make me forget that every normal day we shared was built on something false. She folded the letter neatly and set it on the desk between them. A small, silent monument to everything that had fallen apart. I need time, she said. I need space, to think, to breathe, to decide whether there's anything left to save. She turned toward the door, every movement deliberate, careful, as though she might splinter if she moved too quickly. Catherine, please, he whispered, reaching out. She stopped, but didn't look back. You made choices without me for months, she said quietly. Now I'll make one without you. Then she was gone, and the house fell utterly silent. William stared at the letter, his failure written in his own hand. Outside, life went on, birds sang, sunlight glowed through the glass, utterly indifferent to his collapse. Could a marriage recover from this? Could love survive the wreckage of deceit? For the first time, he realized the answer wasn't his to decide. Catherine walked through the corridors in a daze, her footsteps muffled on the carpet. She didn't see the paintings or the polished floors. Her body moved, but her mind was far away, spinning through everything she'd just heard. She wanted out. Out of the house, out of the air heavy with regret. The garden doors opened with a click, and warm light met her face. The world had the nerve to look beautiful. Sun on roses, birdsong in the hedges, clouds drifting lazily overhead. How could everything look so peaceful when her world had just shattered? She followed the gravel path on instinct, the crunch beneath her shoes the only sound tethering her to reality. Eventually, she reached the old oak, their oak, and sat down on the familiar bench beneath it. She'd sat here on their third date, fingers entwined. Here again the morning after their wedding, giddy and sleep-deprived. Here, too, during harder years, drawing comfort from the tree's steady endurance. It had weathered every storm. Now she wondered if she could do the same. The breeze moved through her hair, carrying the scent of jasmine. She closed her eyes, trying to breathe in rhythm with the wind, but peace felt distant, unreachable behind the walls of pain and disbelief. Memories began to flicker, William laughing, William listening, William lying without flinching. Had she ever really known him? Or had she fallen in love with a man who existed only in her imagination? Even their happiest memories now carried the faint stain of deceit. Every smile, every quiet moment, was there guilt behind it? Had he been calculating what she didn't know while pretending everything was fine? Her thoughts spiraled endlessly until a flash of color drew her attention, a butterfly landing on the bench beside her, wings glinting blue and gold in the sunlight. It moved without hesitation, alive only in the present moment. Catherine watched it, and for the first time in hours, her mind went still. Maybe she couldn't forgive. Maybe she couldn't forget. But she could breathe. And for now, that was enough. The heaviness on Catherine's chest loosened, just enough for her to draw a real breath. She knew she couldn't stay hidden in the garden forever, crouched in the quiet like an injured creature nursing invisible wounds. At some point, she'd have to face the wreckage, decide what came next, what her life would look like now that the truth had changed everything. But not yet. Not in this fragile hour when her heart still felt raw and shaking. What did she want, truly want, beyond duty, beyond appearances, beyond what people expected of her? Part of her longed to run, to pack a bag and vanish into somewhere anonymous, a place where the air didn't carry William's memory. The thought brought an aching kind of relief, freedom, even. To breathe again without choking on broken promises. But another part of her, quieter yet stubborn, wondered if something could still be saved. Not the life they'd had, that was gone, but perhaps something new, rebuilt on honesty this time. Brutal, painful honesty, if that's what it took. Two truths wrestled inside her, both demanding to be heard. She didn't have an answer, not yet, only a sense of direction. She would no longer live reactively, no longer shape herself around someone else's expectations. From here on, her choices would be hers alone, made for her own peace, her own healing, her own future. That meant she needed the rest of the truth. The letter had opened the first crack, but she could feel there was more buried underneath. Things William hadn't written, maybe hadn't dared to. If there was ever going to be any kind of future, she had to know everything. Catherine stood slowly. Her legs trembled, but they held. The trembling woman who had collapsed on the floor of the study was gone. In her place stood someone quieter, harder, and somehow stronger. She wasn't healed, not even close, but she wasn't breaking anymore either. The sun had risen higher, reshaping the light and the shadows across the lawn. Time hadn't stopped for her heartbreak, it was still moving forward. She walked back toward the house, one deliberate step after another, as if each one were a small act of defiance against despair. Inside, the air felt altered, as though the morning's revelations had changed not only her but the walls themselves. From down the corridor came faint sounds from the study. William was still there. Waiting. Hoping. Dreading. She paused at the base of the stairs, gathering her courage. There were questions to ask, boundaries to draw, and choices that would shape everything that came next, even if one of those choices was simply to wait before deciding. When she finally faced William again, she would not be the woman who had opened that envelope. That version of her, the one who trusted completely, no longer existed. In her place was someone learning how to live in fragments. "What happens now?" she whispered to the empty hallway. The words didn't expect an answer. Only time could give one. The first step forward. William had always believed that waiting was one of life's hardest tests. He was a man of motion, someone who found safety in doing, in fixing, in keeping busy enough to avoid the silence. But this time, there was nothing left to do. No plan to execute, no numbers to balance, no lie to smooth over. All that was left was waiting, raw and exposed. He'd been taught since childhood that emotion was weakness, that real men faced their problems privately and spoke about victories only after the struggle was over. That habit had built walls in his marriage. High, silent walls that blocked out the very person who tried to stand beside him. He'd mistaken emotional distance for strength, and only now did he see the cowardice in it. Pain has a way of stripping away pretenses. Sitting alone in his study, staring at the door she'd walked through, William felt the last of his defenses crumble. All that remained was guilt, and the terrible understanding that love alone might not be enough to fix what he'd destroyed. The minutes dragged, shapeless and cruel. He stayed in the chair where he'd fallen earlier, afraid that if he left, she'd return and find him gone. One more act of abandonment. His eyes drifted again and again to the letter on the desk, his own handwriting staring back at him like an accusation. How did a person rebuild trust once it had been shattered? You couldn't demand it, couldn't rush it, couldn't bargain for it. It had to regrow, slow and fragile, like grass through scorched earth. And he had burned everything. Then, footsteps. Slow, steady, unmistakable. His heart clenched. She was coming back. The door opened softly. Catherine stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the light behind her. She looked different, still wounded, yes, but no longer shattered. There was strength in her eyes now, quiet and deliberate. She crossed the room and sat across from him, her movements careful, composed. For a long, suspended moment, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't forgiving, but it wasn't cruel either. It simply was, the fragile space between two people trying to learn a new language after forgetting how to speak. "I've been thinking," Catherine said at last. Her voice was low, but steady. "Out in the garden. About what happens next." William could only nod. His throat was too tight for words. "I have questions," she continued. "Things the letter didn't explain. I need the truth, William, all of it. Not the softened version. Not what you think I can handle. The real truth. Can you do that?" "Yes." The word came out rough, nearly inaudible. He swallowed hard and tried again. "Yes. Whatever you need to know. I'll tell you." And so he did. Piece by piece, he gave her everything. The financial losses, the desperate deals, the nights he'd spent awake rehearsing lies in his head. The fear, the shame, the pride that kept him silent even when the silence was destroying them both. Catherine listened without interrupting. Her face twitched at certain confessions, pain flickering behind her eyes, but she stayed composed. She wanted to hear it all. For once, he didn't hide behind polished words. When he finally stopped, the room felt hollow, scraped clean. "Why didn't you trust me?" she asked quietly. "That's what I can't understand. We were supposed to be partners. Did you think I was too weak? Too naive?" William shook his head, leaning forward, desperate to make her understand. "Never. You're the strongest person I've ever known. I didn't tell you because I was ashamed. I couldn't stand the thought of you seeing me fail. I thought if I fixed it quietly, you'd never have to know I'd fallen short." Catherine's expression softened, but only slightly. "That's not how marriage works," she said, her voice carrying both sadness and clarity. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, even as every word carried the weight of truth. "We're supposed to face difficulties together," she said. "Your shame isolated you, but it also isolated me. It kept me away from something that touched both our lives. I know that now. I should have seen it then, but fear made me blind." Catherine paused, eyes drifting toward the window, as though the garden outside might hold answers. "I don't know if I can trust you again," she admitted quietly. "Not like before, the kind of trust where you believe completely, where doubt never creeps in. I don't know if that's even possible anymore." The words landed hard, but William didn't argue. "I understand," he whispered, his voice tight. She turned her gaze back to him. "Maybe, a different kind of trust is possible," she continued. "One that's aware, careful, but also honest, because it doesn't assume perfection from either of us." A small spark of hope flickered in William's chest. "What does that look like?" he asked softly. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But it starts with boundaries. With you being honest, even when it's uncomfortable. With me being able to ask questions without feeling like I'm being suspicious. With both of us accepting that rebuilding takes time, and that some days will be harder than others." She let that settle, drawing a deep breath. "I'm not promising we'll make it. I'm not even promising I'll stay. But I am willing to try. If you're willing to actually do the work, not just say you'll be honest, but truly be honest." "I am," William said immediately, voice steady now, desperate to prove it. "Whatever it takes. Whatever you need from me." She nodded. "Then we start there. Small steps. Daily honesty. You earning back what was lost, knowing it might take years, and even then, it might